Good morning and a warm welcome to all of you joining us today for this important conference on EU competitiveness and the role of corporate governance. This event is organised by ecoDa, the European Confederation of Directors Associations, which has long been at the forefront of promoting good corporate governance across Europe. We are delighted to have you all with us. The conference is being held at Euronext Brussels, and our audience is entirely online, bringing together governance leaders, policymakers, investors and board members from across Europe and beyond. We would like to extend our sincere thanks to Euronext Brussels for hosting us today. We also would like to acknowledge IBABS, a leading board portal provider, for their support as a sponsor of today's event. Their contribution helps ensure we can facilitate these important discussions on governance and competitiveness. This event would not be able to take place without IBABS. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Trevor Pryor, and I'm delighted to be your Master of Ceremonies for this conference. As well as being your MC today, I'm the CEO and publisher of Board Agenda, the leading news and intelligence resource for corporate governance. With an audience of board members and governance leaders across Europe, UK and internationally, Board Agenda provides the latest news, insight, analysis and research on the very issues we'll be discussing today. If you're looking for expert coverage and in-depth reporting on governance trends, I encourage you to explore Board Agenda as a key resource. But firstly, let us come to the focus of this conference. In an era of economic transformation, shifting geopolitical landscapes and increasing regulatory complexity, Europe faces profound challenges in sustaining its competitive edge. How can we ensure that European companies thrive on the global stage? What role does corporate governance play in shaping a more resilient and forward-thinking business environment? These are the pressing questions at the heart of today's discussions. Throughout the conference, we will examine how corporate governance can play a pivotal role in shaping a more competitive, resilient, and future-focused European business landscape. From regulatory complexity and digital transformation to access to capital and sustainability commitments, boards are navigating an increasingly challenging environment. So allow me to give you an overview of what we will be discussing during this conference. A key focus in recent weeks has been the Omnibus proposal, which reflects ongoing EU efforts to streamline corporate reporting and regulatory requirements, highlighting the broader conversation on how governance can support European business growth. To explore these critical themes, we begin with opening remarks from Rytis Abrezovich, Chair of ecoDa, and Beatrice Richaud-Baum, Director General of ecoDa. Our programme will then kick off with a data-driven analysis of corporate governance trends, examining board composition, evaluation, and remuneration, critical areas that shape the future of European business and global competitiveness. Following this, we will hear from experts in the field who will delve into some of the most pressing issues facing European businesses today. We'll explore regulatory developments at the EU level, focusing on corporate governance policies, and discuss how stakeholder capitalism can be a driver for long-term competitiveness in Europe. Additionally, we will turn our attention to digital transformation, where experts will share insights on how boards can navigate change while staying competitive in a rapidly evolving global market. The conference will then move into two expert panel discussions. Panel 1 will focus on the development of the right ecosystem to support European competitiveness, exploring how governance, regulation, and capital markets can work together to drive business growth. Panel 2 will examine the role of corporate governance in boosting European competitiveness, with a particular focus on how governance practices within key industries influence decision-making, innovation, and long-term success. At the end of both panels, we will open the floor for questions, and we encourage you to engage actively with our speakers. In between the sessions, we will showcase a special video from ecoDa highlighting its journey over the past 20 years, its collaboration with the EU Commission, and its contributions to best practices in governance. And finally, to close the conference, I will moderate a forward-looking conversation with a distinguished panel of speakers, where we will discuss the future of the boardroom and the priorities governance leaders must set to strengthen Europe's global competitiveness. We hope today's discussions will provide valuable insights and stimulate meaningful dialogue as we continue to shape the future of governance in Europe. And with that, let's begin. I now have the pleasure of introducing Rytis Bezovicius and Beatrice Richet-Baum to open the conference. Rytis is chair of ecoDa and president of the Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance. A certified board member, he has extensive leadership and board experience. Beatrice Richet-Baum is Director General of ecoDa, leading governance advocacy in Europe with extensive experience in EU policy and legal affairs. She previously worked in lobbying and commerce, and she holds a doctorate in law. Beatrice and Rytis, over to you.
Thank you, Trevor. Welcome to ecoDa and welcome to the conference commemorating 20th anniversary of our organization. It is a distinct honor to welcome you all. We gather at a crucial juncture where increasing global volatility, technological advancements, evolving stakeholder expectations, and over-regulation define a complex and unpredictable environment. In this dynamic context, the boards of European companies hold a pivotal role in shaping the future. Today, the board's responsibility extends beyond oversight to actively driving the competitiveness strategies necessary for global success. This involves fostering innovation and agility, prioritizing sustainability and ethical practices, strategically managing talent, and ensuring effective risk management and governance, to name a few. I look forward to hearing from our experts and learning their valuable insights and advice on how our boards should foster the stronger resilience and global competitiveness of European businesses. Before we ask our honorable experts to share their insights, I would like to thank ecoDa's partner, IBEPS, for supporting this conference. IBEPS is a board portal solution that helps organizations streamline their governance processes, making it easier to prepare meetings, collaborate, and document decisions effectively. At ecoDa, we also use IBEPS to run our board meetings, and it saves us significant time and effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Rytis. And Beatrice, over to you.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you today for this conference. To mark our 20th anniversary, we are releasing today a compilation of EU legislations, EU laws that have impacted board members over the past 20 years. This compilation shows the importance of corporate governance in the EU policies. It also reminds us how busy ecoDa has been over the past years in responding to all those initiatives. Basically, ecoDa drafted position papers. We also issued reports, guidance. We took part in hearings at the Parliament. We organized workshops, conferences, webinars. And don't be afraid, I'm not going to go through all of them today. What I would like to say is really that ecoDa's work today is really as important as it was when we were first established. And today we are not just celebrating 20 years, we are also addressing the challenges that board members are facing today. And this is why our conference will explore the capacity and the ability for corporate governance to strengthen the EU competitiveness. But I will stop here, and again, I thank you, all of you, to be part of this conference, and I will let Trevor leading the discussion.
Thank you, Rytis and Beatrice, for opening today's conference and for setting the stage for our discussions. Your insights on the challenges and opportunities for European competitiveness provide an important foundation for the conversations ahead. Thank you. To continue setting the scene, I'm pleased to introduce Constance D'Aspremont, CEO of Ethics and Boards, who is joining us here at the Euronext studio. Constance is CEO of Ethics and Boards and is a governance expert with more than 25 years in experience in finance, strategy and sustainability, and is a board member on various organisations across industry. Constance will provide an overview of key corporate governance trends in recent years, highlighting the major shifts shaping boardrooms today. Her presentation will explore board composition and diversity, governance evaluation practices, and evolving approaches to board remuneration, critical areas that will influence how companies navigate the competitive landscape. Constance, over to you.
Thank you, Trevor. I'm delighted to be here today celebrating ecoDa 20th anniversary. I will show some trends in corporate governance across the years, comparing Europe versus US. And I think in boards, our mission is to leverage data to benchmark and drive corporate governance excellence. We see with the growing regulation and the growing reputational risk that it implies, we think it's key to move from a reactive to a proactive approach to governance. And with our global database of million of corporate governance data, we help identify governance weakness and avoiding blind spots. So moving to the presentation and our various topics today introduced by Trevor, I will first deep into board composition and diversity, where I will compare stock Europe 600 with the S&P 100. So first, we see distinct governance model with only 6% of combined chair and CEO functions in Europe versus a majority of this model in the S&P 100. In terms of size, we see that the average is stable with 11 members in Europe and 12 in the US. In terms of independent, Europe is progressing, and the percentage of independent members have increased from 65 to 70%, but it's still lagging the US. And in terms of independent share, Europe is also lagging, but lagging versus the US, but steadily increasing. Now moving to women representation, we have seen in Europe a constant increase from around 30% in 2018 to currently more than 40%. And this has been greatly influenced by the Gender Diversity Balance Directive in 2022. Now, still, in terms of shared boards that are shared by women, we see that the number is, although increasing, still at a low level of 10%. And now, if we look in terms of a comparison versus the US, we see that Europe, in terms of board diversity, is ahead of the US by 6 points. And in terms of board shared by women, is also leading versus the US. Now, going to executive leadership, we see a steady progress from 2018 to 2025, moving from 15% to now around 30%. But again, if we look at leadership, we see that only 1 in 10 of companies are led by a woman CEO. So we see that there are still barriers to leadership. Now, if moving to the executive leadership team, comparing it European executive team with the US executive team, we see that Europe has greatly increased and catch up with the US, with now a very similar figure around 26-27%. And also similar in terms of women CEO, where we see 8% now in Europe versus 9% in the US. And looking now at diversity in terms of nationality, which is also an important risk management factor in a globalized world, we see that Europe is also leading with only 17% of boards that have no extra-national, while 26% have no extra-national in the US. And in terms of number of nationality, we have in average 3.6 nationalities in boards in Europe and 2.6 only in the US. Now, if you look here, you see that indeed there was an increase in a percentage of extra-national in boards, and we see a slight increase in both in Europe and US in terms of Asian nationals. On average, European directors are younger than their US counterpart. We see a difference of 4 years. And if we looked more in detail, we see that in Europe, there are less than 10% of board members with more than 70-year-old, while there is more than 20% in the US. So European boards are significantly younger than their US counterpart, with 10% with less than 50 in Europe versus only 3% in the US. In average, the seniority of board members is 6 years younger versus is 6 years, versus 8 years in the US. So we see in general, in terms of age renewal, more dynamic boards in Europe. And we also see that there are 2 times more directors with more than 12 years seniority in the US, which indeed brings a lot of experience, but can also, shows a less renewal, less dynamic, and potentially stronger conflict of interest. Now, moving towards board remuneration practice, we see that the number of meetings is increasing over time, and we see as well that the directors' annual remuneration in Europe have increased from an average of 70,000 to an average of 81,000, and this shows as well the increased, let's say, requirements that are on the board member shoulders. Now, last topic, board evaluation. We see that 30% increase in external board evaluation. So more and more, the European are moving towards external evaluation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Constance, for that insightful overview. We now turn to our first keynote speaker, Dan Dionisi, from the European Commission's Directorate General for Justice and Consumers. Dan leads the Company Law Unit, shaping EU policy on corporate governance and company law. His work focuses on regulatory frameworks that enhance corporate transparency, shareholder rights, and sustainability in EU markets. Today, Dan will provide an update on key EU initiatives, including the Omnibus proposal, which aims to simplify corporate reporting and reduce regulatory burdens to strengthen European competitiveness. He will also address broader governance reforms, including sustainability due diligence and digitalisation in company law, and what these mean for businesses operating in the EU. Dan, over to you.
Thank you, Trevor, and happy to have this opportunity to update you on recent and upcoming developments in corporate governance and company law at EU level. So these areas, company law, corporate governance, these policies are really at the forefront of the drive for European competitiveness. And we see this both in terms of activity in recent years, but also of what's coming up. So I will start briefly by recapping that a lot has been done in recent years, starting with the directives of 2019 on company law digitalization and on cross-border mobility of companies, as well as very recently the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive adopted last year and just entered into force at the end of January, upgrading Digital Company Law Directive, which takes really digitalization to the next level in terms of facilitating cross-border operations by companies in the EU. So a lot has been achieved recently, but quite a lot is also to come and is part of the key priorities of this new Commission. And I will briefly refer to three initiatives that are within the remit of my unit and will be, let's say, on our to-do list for this coming period. First, I will refer to the 28th regime for companies. Then, indeed, to the simplification exercise regarding sustainability due diligence and sustainability reporting. And not least, to the possible review of the Shareholder Rights Directive, which is a key piece of legislation in terms of corporate governance. So, the 28th regime for companies, it's an idea that has come out quite strongly from the Letta and Draghi reports produced last year, was then taken up in the political guidelines of the new Commission and in the mission letter of our Commissioner for Justice, Michael McGrath, who is tasked to lead this work on the 28th regime as a legal regime for companies which will simplify applicable rules and reduce the cost of failure, including in relevant aspects of corporate law, insolvency, and labor law. And here I quoted from the recently adopted Competitiveness Compass on the 29th of January. So clearly a key deliverable for this Commission. It's not a new topic. There is long-standing interest from the business community in a 28th regime and strong support throughout the years. There have been previous attempts, some successful, some unsuccessful. More recently, we've heard a number of calls, in particular from the startup and scale-up community, a petition by a group called EU Inc., who also produced an outline for this 28th regime. Just to tell you that we will be discussing in the coming period about this initiative in a high-level forum on justice for growth with a number of stakeholders, also with the member states and with the European Parliament. Things that we are looking at in particular are the scope of the corporate legal framework that will be at the core of this 28th regime, mainly whether it should be open to all companies, for instance, all private limited liability companies, or targeted to, let's say, innovative companies. So this is one of the topics under discussion. Another one is the legislative approach to be taken, and here we're looking at various options that would not necessarily require unanimity in Council, which has been an obstacle in the past. And also what is important is that this 28th regime will build on the recent achievements in company law, in particular through digitalization, online setting up of companies, the once-only principle achieved with the recent directive on upgrading digital company law, that they don't need to resubmit their documents when setting up branches or subsidiaries cross-border. The EU company certificate, the digital power of attorney, which will be compatible and part of the business wallet. Some of these already respond to some of the demands that we're hearing from stakeholders, but we want to take them forward. So that's about the 28th regime. On the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, of course, there's been a lot of focus on the recently adopted proposal for a simplification omnibus, adopted at the end of February. So just to recall, the directive has been in force since July of last year, not yet in application, not yet transposed. And it's not about reporting. So the omnibus touches upon both corporate sustainability due diligence, which is a directive within the remit of my unit, but also corporate sustainability reporting directive, which covers the reporting part. I will refer in particular to the due diligence directive. The focus of the omnibus has been to try to reduce as much as possible the burden on companies while still maintaining the policy objectives, which are to ensure that adverse impacts on human rights and the environment across value chains are effectively addressed. And there are a number of changes introduced trying to keep this balance, so reduce as much as possible the burden on the large companies in scope, but also on their business partners in the value chains, while still ensuring that adverse impacts are tackled. So among very quickly, just the main changes proposed by the Commission are to let's say, eliminate the systematic in-depth assessment that companies had to do on their indirect business partners, so deeper in the value chain, and they will go for that only when there is plausible information about adverse impacts. Also, reduced frequency of the regular assessments that they have to do of their overall due diligence activities. This is reduced from annually to every 5 years, but still with an obligation to do this on an ad hoc basis whenever there is a need. Also a simplified and streamlined engagement with stakeholders, while still keeping the focus on those directly affected by the company's activities and those of its business partners, as well as an enhanced protection for smaller companies in the value chains, which is now actually extended also to small mid-caps, so both SMEs and small mid-caps. So there are other changes as well, including in terms of timelines, increased level of harmonization to ensure a level playing field. Now these are, the proposal is now debated by the co-legislators, the Council, and the Parliament, and we look forward to a speedy adoption, so that then we move to implementation. And actually, one of the changes proposed is to accelerate the production of the main guidelines, and therefore we need to accelerate our work in that area as well. The estimated savings from this Omnibus Simplification Initiative just related to the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive are 320 million per year on a recurrent basis, as well as a one-off reduction of 60 million. And I will just end briefly referring to the Shareholder Rights Directive. If you watch the news today, you will see that the Commission will adopt its strategy on the Savings and Investment Union. As part of that, it is announced that there may be a review of the Shareholder Rights Directive, also a very key piece of legislation in the corporate governance area, and with a significant role in facilitating investment, in particular cross-border in the single market. And we have started work on this already with a partial evaluation study that was recently published. And we look forward to starting the process now towards a possible revision. And there will be consultations as part of that. And I very much look forward at stakeholders like ecoDa being involved in these consultations. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Again, a lot has been done, but a lot is still ahead of us, and looking forward to continued engagement and cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for those valuable insights into the evolving corporate governance landscape at the EU level. Your perspective helps frame today's discussions on how governance can support European competitiveness. We now turn to our next keynote speaker, Professor Colin Meyer, Emeritus Professor at the Sade Business School, University of Oxford. Colin is a leading authority on corporate governance and stakeholder capitalism, having published and spoken extensively on how business can balance profitability with their wider societal responsibilities. His work, including the British Academy's Future of the Corporation programme, explores how companies can embed purpose into their governance structures. In today's keynote, Colin will examine how stakeholder capitalism can strengthen European competitiveness. And I'm delighted to welcome Colin. Thank you, Colin. Over to you.
Very much indeed. And I'd like to start by saying how very glad I am to be here and to congratulate ecoDa on its 20th anniversary and the immense contribution that it has made to promoting the governance and performance of business in Europe over that period. It's a record of which it should feel justifiably proud. As you all will be all too aware, we are currently encountering immense headwinds in terms of European policy and business practice. The demise of ESG regulation and sustainability are widely regarded as resulting from US politics. I'd suggest that this is not entirely the case. They were on their way out long before that. ESG was seriously flawed from the outset, and its demise has been slow and painful. It failed because it didn't serve a purpose. It was both insignificant and unworkable. In its extrinsic single materiality form as promoted by the IFRS, it was no more than another investment risk factor. In its intrinsic double materiality form as advocated by the EU, it was another cost center and form of regulation. It was neither designed to save the world nor promote growth, investment, and prosperity. It should not, therefore, be missed. But do not take this as a sign that all is well without it. All is not well and will not be. It is manifestly getting worse. Crises are increasing in frequency and growing in intensity. Their frequency and intensity will continue to increase until we solve the problem. The problem is that there's been too much emphasis on risk, regulation, and costs, and not enough on value creation and profit, and the commercial opportunity that comes from solving problems. Profit is the fuel that lies at the heart of capitalism and the incentive that drives business. Profit comes from the Latin proficere and profectus, to advance and progress. That is precisely from where a profit should come, from advancement and progress. But too often it's also associated with disadvantage and regress. As currently measured, a profit is simply the difference between the revenue of a business and its input costs, its labor, material, and capital costs. However, that does not account for the costs of paying its employees below a living wage, suppliers below a fair trade price, or the pollution, biodiversity loss, and global warming a company causes. In other words, it does not account for avoiding or cleaning up the mess that a company creates. A company's measured costs are not therefore its true costs, and its measured profits are not its true, fair profits. Indeed, whenever the directors of a company sign off their accounts as being true and fair, they're doing no such thing. They're neither true nor fair. They're not true because they do not reflect their true costs, and they're not fair because they are therefore not reporting a fair profit. They must do both. And there's one party that has a particular duty to ensure that they do. Their owners, their shareholders. Shareholders have many rights, but they have one overriding responsibility: to ensure they profit without harm. We're justifiably outraged when companies profit at the expense of others, as they did in the financial crisis. Profit without harm is a fundamental requirement of every business in the world and a basic right of all citizens and parts of the world. This is not just a moral precept, but a necessary requirement for the functioning of economies. As Adam Smith noted in The Wealth of Nations, without it, markets and competition fail because good firms that incur their true costs and earn a fair profit cannot compete against those that do not. Far from encouraging runs to the top, competition creates runs to the bottom, a Gresham law of bad firms driving out the good. Profit without harm is both a necessary and sufficient condition for markets to function and competition to promote social well-being. It's the duty of directors of corporations to ensure that they report their true costs and fair profits without harm. It's the role of shareholders to ensure that they earn nothing else. Corporate law should determine that corporate success derives from profit without harm. Corporate auditing, reporting, and governance standards should establish that companies' accounts and reports are true and fair, and stewardship codes that asset owners and managers allocate, manage, and oversee their capital to create long-term value for their beneficiaries without harm to others. Together, they will then provide a uniform standard of performance for all businesses everywhere. But much more significant than just avoidance of the negative is the contribution this makes to the positive, to value creation. It's the source of the innovation, imagination, and inspiration that allow profits to be earned without harm. Instead of risk-taking coming at the expense of other stakeholders, as at present, it is solely borne by those who should bear it, namely the shareholders. Shareholders become the true residual claimants of a firm. This is not a stakeholder proposition. Directors' duties of loyalty remain solely to their shareholders, but in the context of a recognition that the success and interests of the corporation derive from profiting without harm. In other words, from value creation, not value diversion or value transfer from others. It is this that associates innovation and investment with advancement and progress, not disadvantage or regress. By aligning shareholders with other stakeholders' interests, all parties, including governments, are encouraged to innovate and invest. Trust is created where mistrust prevails, and stakeholders are confident about investing in companies where at present they fear being exploited and expropriated. In particular, the interests of government in social well-being are aligned with those of business in profits without harm. As a result, firms are assisted by their stakeholders and governments in internalizing and capitalizing benefits conferred on others that currently remain external and unrewarded. Mutually reinforcing interests promote partnerships between businesses, investors, governments, customers, employees, suppliers, and communities in committing to a common purpose of shared prosperity. There are two reasons why this shift from costly regulation and reporting to financial value creation from problem solving appeals to both businesses and investors. Firstly, it's about the core of what a business does, its strategy, namely problem solving. And secondly, it's the motive for financial investment, namely financial value creation. For companies that recognize their purpose to be profitable problem solving, not creation, new problems and crises are new opportunities. They find innovative ways of solving problems profitably. In the process, they create new problems, which in turn they solve profitably, which then create further problems. And so businesses and the world progress and advance. Innovation will provide stakeholders with information to judge whether firms are really profiting to their benefit or detriment. From satellite technology on the state of natural capital, from social media about customer and employee satisfaction, and from blockchain technology on conditions in supply chains, all processed by artificial intelligence into intelligible information for communities, customers, employees, suppliers, as well as management and investors. This will allow companies to shift their focus from wading in the weeds of exploitation, expropriation, and unjust enrichment at the expense of others to surfing the waves of innovation, imagination, and inspiration, of earning fair profits from shared prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin, for that thought-provoking address on corporate governance and business purpose. We now move on to our next presentation, which will be delivered online from Toronto by Professor David Beattie. He is Emeritus Professor at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. David is a global corporate governance leader, former president of a major North American food company, and veteran of more than 40 boards. A Rotman professor, he co-founded Canada's Directors Education Programme. David will explore the challenge of the digital tsunami, a seismic shift in business driven by rapid advancement in technology, and the lack of preparedness among European companies to compete with the US and China. As businesses face unprecedented digital disruption, the question is not just how they adapt, but whether they will survive. David will share insights from his work with global companies and tech leaders, highlighting the urgent steps boards must take to stay competitive in this new era. David, over to you.
Well, thank you. I'm pleased to be here from embattled Canada, bringing you a perspective from across the Atlantic. We are hoping that we survive these onslaughts. So if we could advance this slide. I'm going to talk about similarities in these two markets, the EU and the United States. And the one feature that we both share, next slide, is that our publicly traded markets are in decline. You'll see here that in the UK, the markets are down from about 4,200 to about 1,000 publicly traded companies. Next, that in Europe, next slide, please. That in Europe and Germany, we've gone up and down, but now we're on a down cycle. And finally, next slide, we are in the United States in a real drought, where the number of publicly traded companies in the last century has dropped by 50%. So, next slide. We are sharing that problem, but today in the United States, only 15% of companies have revenue above 100 million US are publicly listed. The entire market has in fact gone over to private equity, venture capital, and is invisible. You don't read it in the Financial Times. You don't read it in the Wall Street Journal. You may not see it in The Economist. So this activity has disappeared from the radar screens that are easily accessible. Next. I call this, from public scratch, less than 50 years old, the United States is dominating the European Union. And this is the feature that's going to be continuing as we go forward, that the United States is progressing faster and faster and faster, and the European Union is not moving. It's a case, I think, to Colin Meyer, that in the United States, it's what I call raw capitalism. It's not fair capitalism. We don't deal with fair profit. We do with a competitive advantage wherever it can be gained and at whatever cost. So with that, let's go forward to the digital tsunami, my visualization. The next slide. Next slide, please. This is 50 to 100 feet high, a mile long, traveling at 500 miles an hour when it hits. There are 10 of them in a row. You can't just hold your breath and hope it goes away. This is a fundamental transformation of everything we know about business, about living, about commodities, about homes. That digital tsunami is devastating in its impact. Next. Now, I feel that not all directors of publicly traded companies are aware of this, and that's why I'm here today, because I am an apostle of the impact and magnitude of these changes. Next. Next, please. So I'm going to talk briefly about scale and pace of innovation, the speed of introduction, and the fact that this is largely an invisible movement. So unless you subscribe to PitchBook or SB Insights, you are not going to understand and know what is going on here. Next, please. Here's an example that I'll just run through in marketing tech. So here's a tiny field of endeavor, marketing tech. There have been 14,000 new companies introduced, 14,000 of them in the last 15 years. Next, and you'll see that this is a list of them. This is another place where you can get information, Martech. But every single dot you see there is a company startup founded by somebody with some idea and financed by somebody. Next. And if you take a closer look at customer relationship management, it's even more devastating. So this is only the tip of the iceberg, though. 14,000 new companies funded, ready to go in one field, but over 500 million digital apps and services will be developed and deployed by the end of last year. So this is not casual. This is systemic. This is overriding all conventional business norms. Next. I'll just run through these slides one by one, but in every business arena. This is retail and commercial banking. Next. This is, disrupting the happy hour, which is one of my favorite ones. Next. This is the futures of stadium tech market. I didn't even know there was such a marketplace. Next. And across the universe, there are 1,205 private companies now valued at $1 billion. You can see them on the right in tiny little markers. Next. And you'll see that the U.S. is home to half of all the unicorns, followed by China and India. Germany has 32, France has 26, but the United States has 654. The EU's total is 111, 20%. Next. And if you take a look at funding, scale, and pace, this is in the development of things like ChatGPT, which went from $2 billion in 2020 to $34 billion in funding last year. 2 to 34. There's huge amounts of money being put in there, and you can see the spectacular growth field of interactive programs like ChatGPT and so on. Next. Speed of introduction. I'll go to the next slide. You'll see here that it took Alexander Graham Bell on the left invented the telephone about 1900. It took 80 years to get it to an 80% market share. Now you see innovations on the right vertically disappearing. Smartphones are now 6.8 billion. Next. ChatGPT got to 100 million users in about 2 weeks. So incredible development of products and services that become available and become instantly adoptable in today's internet age. Next. So I asked Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, whose culture is to grow constantly, improve 1% a day. They have over 600 PhDs in machine learning, 2,300 researchers, And I said, what is the advantage going forward for companies in this world? And he said one thing: speed of adoption, speed of innovation. Go ahead, next slide. So my last point here, is that it's largely invisible. You've got to find a place on top of these industries and on top of these innovations. And if you don't, you'll fall further and further behind. Next. Go ahead, next. Some of these examples, private funding in 2023, look at that. North America had $424 billion in private equity, Europe 160, Asia 54, and the rest of the world 12. You cannot find these figures in the Wall Street Journal. Next. And the number of newly funded AI startups in the last decade, look at that, 5,509 in the United States, 1,400 in China, and perhaps 1,000 in Europe. Go ahead, next. So private investment in 2023 by area, 67 billion in the United States. So the leadership is there. It's in America. It's in what I call raw capitalism, not fair capitalism. People run over each other all the time in this arena. And if you go to the next slide, in terms of patents, you'll see that there's one patent in a European company in the top 20 ranked by generative AI patents. So Europe doesn't appear to even exist in this whole new phenomenon called generative AI. Next. And this is a McKinsey slide from its research this last year on spending in the AI arena in Western Europe and the United States. And Europe lags behind the US in AI and IT spending across sectors with an average gap of 45 to 70%. Next. Given these things, and given that Ray Kurzweil believes that these price performance of computation will continue to grow at an exponential rate, this means that, next slide, that we are in an era of unparalleled technological evolution. Nicholas Kristof, writing in the New York Times last August, said it's the most revolutionary technology since Prometheus brought us fire. Next. And the United States has the advantage. They've got tech giants that generate enormous amounts of cash. They spend more than companies abroad to build them. They develop the top engineers and developers to Silicon Valley and or to Boston. And there are few regulations that stand in development. This is what I call, again and again, raw capitalism. Next slide. And for that purpose, I think for businesses everywhere who don't adapt, don't get started, don't get onto this realm, that if you have only one question left to answer, this is an explosive extinction event, and that's where you want to be buried. Lastly, next slide. The French tech guru Xavier Niel said, if AI innovation fails to take root in Europe, the region will be, quote, demoted. That was in the Financial Times in November. I think you're there. I don't think this is going to improve unless there's dramatic change. And the next slide will show where advantage now lies in some of these arenas, with the China leading, America leading on the right in certain areas, contested areas, and the EU leading only in regulation. So thank you very much. My next and last slide shows the wars that we'll be fighting in Canada, and I hope you wish us well. We need you as partners, so please don't go away, but please, innovation is alive, well, and a digital tsunami is overwhelming the rest of the world. You've got to catch up. Thank you, and congratulations on the 20th anniversary.
Well, thank you, David. That was very fascinating. Your insights into the challenges and opportunities of the digital tsunami provide a critical perspective on how businesses and their boards must adapt to remain competitive in Europe. So we now move to our first panel discussion, developing the right ecosystem for EU competitiveness. This session will explore how corporate governance can support Europe's ability to compete on the global stage. While today's conversations have already highlighted some of the pressures facing European businesses, from digital transformation to regulatory complexity, this panel will take a broader view of the structural factors that are shaping EU competitiveness. How can we ensure that European capital markets attract investment? What role does corporate governance play in fostering business growth and innovation? And how do we strike the right balance between regulation and flexibility? Moderating this discussion is Roger Barker, Director of Policy and Corporate Governance at the Institute of Directors. Roger is a corporate governance and corporate governance expert, a former investment banker. He is an author, speaker, and Oxford-educated academic in governance and politics. He will be guiding a distinguished panel of experts. Maria Altin is chair of Business Europe's Company Law Working Group and a senior advisor at the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise, specializing in corporate law, governance, and securities regulation. She previously held senior legal roles at Ericsson. Philippe Lambrecht is a business lawyer and professor at University Louvain, specializing in financial law, corporate governance, and entrepreneurship. He is a board member of European Issuers and former Secretary General of the Belgian Federation of Enterprises. Benoit van der Hove is CEO of Euronext Brussels, with over 20 years of experience in capital markets, finance and law, including senior roles at ING. Séverine Niervoort is the Global Policy Director at the International Corporate Governance Network, an investor-led association that promotes good corporate governance standards globally. She's also an independent director on the board of a large listed Italian bank. And Alessandra Delicio is Head of Governance and Strategy at Lloyds Europe. She supports executive committees and boards of directors to align business strategies with regulatory requirements across international markets. And with that, I'll hand over to Roger to introduce the discussion and lead us through what promises to be a compelling exchange of ideas. Over to Roger. Over to you.
Trevor, thank you very much indeed. And hello, everyone. Well, I think that David's presentation has really laid down the challenge for all of us. How far the US and China is moving ahead of the EU in areas like innovation, technology, and AI. And of course, the EU is very well aware of this, and certainly since the publication of the Draghi report last September, the EU has started to focus on how growth and innovation can be boosted, and the European Commission has taken that up in its latest work plan. The question then is, how do we get the ecosystem right in order to boost European competitiveness? And that is what we're going to be focusing on today. And perhaps, Benoit, we can start with capital markets. I mean, especially sitting in your position at Euronext, you must have some specific views on how we can boost the competitiveness of European capital markets. How do you think we can get more companies in Europe to list and also to start up and scale up their activities?
Yeah, thank you, Roger, for the question, and happy to be here in this panel this morning. Yeah, it's a very important question, because if we go back to 2019, when we had the previous EU elections, it was just after all the school strikes with students asking for climate initiatives, and that led to the Commission number one of Ursula von der Leyen, and that led to the Green Deal with the CSRD, taxonomy, SFDR, etc. And that was a very ambitious plan, but we forgot something very important at that time, is look after the European competitiveness. Because if we want to have a sustainable planet tomorrow, we also need to have a sustainable economy on our continent. And that's why we have seen all these reports coming out, first the Letta report and the Draghi report, but Christian Noé in France also issued a very important report. And yeah, we at Euronext, we obviously welcome very much initiatives that have been taken in the last months and last years. For instance, the Listing Act that simplifies and that brings some relief for listed companies with lower thresholds for prospectus requirements. and much more exemptions than what we had before. The red tape will be cut on the CSRD. It's a very important topic, of course, making companies sustainable, but we don't have to put too much burden on listed companies. I have several CEOs or chairmen of listed companies that told me, well, Benoit, we just double the size of our annual report with CSRD. So that's way too much. And so the initiative that was taken is very important to rethink these topics with a view of our European competitiveness. And definitely, we also have to look at what's working well in Europe, because we see in some countries that there are things that work pretty well. If I take examples of countries like France, like Italy, like Sweden, where we see thriving capital markets, where we see that there is quite an easy access to the capital markets for smaller sized companies. And basically, it starts from very small companies to extremely large companies that go public, and they have maintained and continue to build an ecosystem which is very strong. And that's something that should inspire all of us, all the countries, to see, okay, what are the strengths that they have in these countries and that we can replicate in other countries. Basically, we should go back to the multilateralism, but looking at which are the strengths that we can pan-Europeanize and make sure that these can be applied in other countries.
Philippe, I mean, well, one thing that we see a good deal of is European companies thinking about listing in the United States instead of Europe, perhaps switching their listing. That's also something we see in the UK market as well. It's a problem. Do you think that there are barriers for European companies in terms of listing in Europe, which make the threshold too high? And would you agree with Benoit that the omnibus regulation, which has been proposed by the European Commission, which is, I suppose, trying to simplify some of the rules, do you think that's going to be successful in changing the picture?
Well, thank you for the question. We'll go back a little bit in history. When I was a young professor, financial law in Belgium was about 300 provisions of law. Today, I don't know, but it's probably more than 100,000. So in 30 years' time, we've increased the regulation tremendously. Of course, not only in Europe, also in the United States, but still in Europe, like the presentation before rightly said, we've been champions in regulation. Now, you can only regulate an economy if there is an economy. So we should go back to basics. Why can't we make a regulation that is more business friendly? Why can't we take more into consideration what it is to run a business, to bringing from small to medium, and then to bringing to the listing? And all these questions are very important. If you ask myself about the omnibus, I will go a little bit earlier. We decided the green transition. It is an important decision. But why didn't we regulate it well? Why did we over-regulate ESG? Why did we over-regulate all that? Because we are champions in wanting to be the best in class in regulation. Now, I think we could probably do a better job if we were listening more to the people who are in the driving seat in business. And one of the suggestions that I would make as a member of European issuers is that in all the working groups trying to develop all these new innovation and innovative types, we should have more people from the business knowing what it is, the cost of reporting, knowing what it is to effectively make your business grow. And we should also be extremely interested by the tax schemes that make it possible for companies to grow and to be able to use their own capital also for growth. Because it's very nice to have debt, it's very nice, but you need also to have your own money that makes you grow. And all these questions, to me, have not yet been fully addressed. The Capital Market Union has been a mantra for years, but it's still not there. So yes, I think there is a lot of work to do.
Yes. Maria, could I turn to you? I wonder what your thoughts are on the omnibus regulation, because this has just been proposed by the European Commission. It still has some way to go, I think, through the EU legislative process, and it relates to a number of areas, including corporate reporting, especially of ESG and sustainability issues in the EU, but it also relates to the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive around due diligence of supply chains. Do you feel that those directives went too far, actually, in terms of imposing a burden on European companies? And does the omnibus regulation now offer a good way back from that that's going to allow EU companies to be more competitive?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. Let me just take a small step back before going into the omnibus question, which is, of course, an important one. Talking more about the general competitiveness landscape that has been addressed by a few already today. And I think that from the Business Europe perspective, this is a matter that has been on the agenda for a long time. And Business Europe is not the only one who has raised it. You have referred to Draghi and Letta before today. So it's really welcome that the European Commission now listen to this and take this consideration into account. And they clearly do through focusing on the omnibus regulations now coming. One thing that is quite clear, because this omnibus, the first omnibus, which covers the reporting and the due diligence, for example, relate to rules that were just recently finalized. And that shows that the work wasn't done when it should have been done, because, of course, these considerations should have been there in the legislative process at an earlier stage. So I really hope, first and foremost, that we learn from this experience and do things in the right order going forward. When it comes to the competitiveness, Business Europe just recently has launched a Reboot Europe strategy. I just wanted to mention it. It goes a little bit back, talking about the foundations for running a business and focus on what is hampering investment today. And the focus areas in that report include energy and costs for energy, excessive regulation that we're talking about now, lengthy permitting procedures, skills and labor shortages. So really the basics for doing business. How do we make an environment where it's possible to do this in the best way? So it will be key that we continue to focusing on how to make business successfully within the EU. And that's really probably the back to basics that Philip just mentioned. We need to look at these core conditions. Talking more about the omnibus in detail, as I said, it's great to see the competitiveness focus now. When it comes to the proposals in detail, I think we have to be really mindful now, looking into each and every one of them to see that they really provide the simplifications that have been asked for. So this is an important task now for us all to contribute to getting the simplifications and improvements that we're looking for. And we must be really mindful to secure that the discussion is not broadened to open up matters that are not simplifications. So this must be the key focus. And I believe that we have a situation where this is a clear focus, at least from the EU Commission, which is very good. One clear benefit that we see in the omnibus is the focus on harmonization of the requirements, the due diligence requirement. You may recall that there was a clause in the due diligence directive from start focusing on this, and that has been expanded a little bit to harmonize some more of the actual due diligence requirements. And this is really important because one of the main reasons and one of the main benefits for businesses of the CSDDD, the due diligence directive, was the creation of a level playing field within the EU in this area to avoid that businesses would have to comply with 27 different sets of due diligence requirements across the union. So this is a very positive thing. And there are other things that go definitely in the right direction. So that's good. And then especially the focus and the aims are great. And it's also very good as Dan pointed out from DG just earlier that the spirit and the ambitions in terms of sustainability remain, and I think that businesses are really would like to emphasize that as well. The ambition of these regulations is great, and we support it. It just have to be practically possible to handle in practice by businesses. And also, we have to be really mindful that the requirements that we put in place in these areas are such that when we comply with them, it does have the positive effects sought. So we're not only creating tick box exercises for businesses that will not have the positive effects on the environment and human rights we're looking for. When it comes to the reporting frameworks, it's of course very good that the thresholds are raised, because the directive became super heavy for businesses, and that's clear, and it cannot be that broadly applicable.
Something that came out of David's presentation was that the EU seems to be ahead of the world in terms of regulation, which may not be a good thing, which reminds me of this rather critical saying, which is America innovates, China imitates, and Europe regulates, which is a rather a damning sort of phrase, but it seems to have some evidence from David's work. I mean, based from where you are standing, is the regulatory burden here in the EU a problem? And, is it something which is holding us back vis-a-vis the United States, North America, and Asia?
Thanks for the question, Roger. Well, what a responsibility to answer this question on behalf of the whole business world in Europe. Actually, I think that regulation per se is not a problem, but as in real estate, the golden rule is location, location, location. In regulation, the golden rule is proportionality, proportionality, proportionality. That means that regulation per se is good, and we have heard just earlier how much countries, like for example the United States, are ahead of the European Union precisely because they are ahead on the regulation on topics like artificial intelligence. However, is it too fast? Is it too slow in Europe? This is also the dilemma that we face. And sometimes what we observe is that regulation comes too slow, too late, and provides companies with a climate of uncertainty. And uncertainty is, of course, not fostering competitiveness. However, when the regulation then is finally there, it is implemented very fast. So the burden on the company is to get up to speed on a new regulation too fast. And that's the reason why we now have to stop the clock with the omnibus regulation, because companies are expected to implement requirements that are new and are not fit for purpose for their size and complexity. So that's why it is important, yes, to regulate the market for the benefit of the consumers and also for the business, but with proportionality, and also to foster regulatory and supervisory convergence. This is a message that I've heard very strongly recently at the ESMA 50th anniversary conference in Paris, where even the regulators were saying we need to simplify regulation and we need to create supervisory convergence. We cannot have in each member state very different regulation that companies are required to implement, and the way companies like supervised entities are regulated should be harmonized. So when they operate like us, for example, in different jurisdictions, they will have some very simple and clear rules to follow, and the way these rules are implemented by the supervisory authorities will be the same. And this simplification will foster competitiveness, as highlighted also recently in the report of Enrico Letta on the internal market.
Thank you. Well, can I just encourage the audience, if you have any questions, we are going to be collecting these, and we'll move to look at your questions in due course. So please use the chat functions. But Severine, can I now turn to you? I mean, you're viewing this whole debate through the lens of an institutional investor. And I'm wondering what you make of the omnibus regulation and the kind of motivation and thinking behind it. Because, I mean, sometimes investors can welcome new regulation in the sense that it may provide a sort of level playing field across companies, and it may actually make the governance role of investors easier. On the other hand, of course, you want the companies that you're investing in to flourish, to grow, and to be highly profitable. I mean, do you think that the European Commission has got the balance right with this proposed omnibus regulation?
Thanks. Yes, so very interesting question, but so many important things were said before. So I'd like to also take a step back from just the CSRD or the omnibus and talk about the broader context and provide maybe a perspective that would be the investor perspective. So European businesses are operating in a very challenging environment, right? We talked about that, geopolitical uncertainty, trade tensions, the pace of innovation in other markets, the digital transformation, and the difficulty to compete in these circumstances. So the EU, European businesses, they have an issue of innovation and of productivity. So for investors, what we clearly see in the past decade is US shares have outperformed European shares in a quite a striking way. So this is a source of concern for policymakers, for companies, for investors, and we're all here thinking about that. There is also the question of the decline in IPOs, but that's not an EU problem, right? That's also a concern for the UK, and it's also a big discussion in the United States, actually. So how do we respond to that? And we've focused here in the discussion a lot about regulation. I mean, is regulation the problem? Is regulation the reason for all these issues? I don't think so. But I think it's an important and interesting time to think about over-regulation, about red tape, about regulation that have accumulated and the contradiction between regulations. So we can't ignore the difficulties for European businesses to deal with that. And it's really, really positive that the Commission is thinking about this sort of maybe over-regulation mentality. But what worries me, because we are, as a result, we are in a situation of general anxiety in the current context. And in this moment of anxiety, there is a risk that we look for quick fixes and we portray this quick fix as the solution. And that is, again, not just happening in the EU. What I think is important is to not hinder the foundation of good corporate governance, to not throw the whole Green Deal out of the window. So we need to keep the pillars of we want well-governed company, we don't want to ignore climate change, and we don't want to sacrifice our welfare state. These are maybe the pillars of the European economy. What we've seen, so at the moment, I find it very worrying, the political narratives in the United States, a little bit in Europe, in some countries, where in the name of competitiveness, very weird pieces of legislation are adopted. You might have seen the recent proposed changes in Delaware. There's been a recent legislation in Italy where we were going to, close down AGMs, where shareholders can't attend the AGMs, not even virtually, where it's very difficult for the outgoing board of directors to propose a list of candidates. All of that in the name of competitiveness. The UK has changed its listing rules, removing the mandatory vote on significant and related party transactions in the name of competitiveness. I think this is a bit misguided. So I'm covering lots of different topics. I also heard right now in the discussion that, companies are moving to the US to list. I don't think it's the regulation is the issue. actually the legislative burden in the United States is quite heavy, and there is litigation in the United States, and there is liability and proxy fights. So it's not necessarily the reason why companies move to the US. But in the US, you have access to sophisticated investors that perhaps understand your business models. You have maybe other companies that do something similar. So if you are, I don't know, a tech company, you might think that you're going to get a better valuation in the United States. There is a high liquidity, a huge market. Maybe you have a more sort of easier process leading to the IPO, access to talents. There are lots of different factors that motivate a company to go public in one market or the other. Now, yes, so because you asked me about CSRD, so if you want, I can answer that. So yes, I'll just talk about sustainability reporting because it's of course something that investors have been asking for. Now, the investor perspective is that companies should report financially material sustainability information. So if you're facing risks or opportunities, you need to be transparent with your investors about that, and you need to show how you're managing these risks. That's why investors are very supportive of the work of the ISSB with that financial materiality lens. Now, the CSRD is much broader, and it's very, very heavy to comply with. And investors have written to the Commission. If you look at the most response to the consultation from the Commission, to investors' perspective, to the European Commission, we've highlighted early enough that the ESRS standards were very, very burdensome and would be costly for companies to comply with. What I would encourage the Commission to think about now is adopting the ISSB and making sure that companies report the financially material information at a minimum. And then companies could voluntarily report additional information if they think it's important for the stakeholders. Thanks.
Philippe, I wonder what you think about what Séverine was saying. I mean, she was highlighting that if we go too far, if we throw the baby out with the bathwater, then we're going to endanger the achievement of a lot of the objectives which Europe has held dear, not least achieving net zero and the Green Deal. I wonder what you think about that. Do you feel that nonetheless we're going to be able to achieve those objectives, even if we move to the omnibus regulation, which does simplify some green requirements?
Thank you for the question, and like my predecessors, I'm not sure I can answer to that such an important question, but nevertheless I will try. First of all, I agree with what has been said. A lot of Europe's problem is not regulation, it is our ecosystem. We need to have a better ecosystem for business before we regulate it less or more. That's another question. And I think that we need to concentrate on making the internal market a truer reality than it is today. There are still too many difficulties for companies to go from one country to another. We still have 27 different jurisdictions, and we've been speaking of company law, financial law, but there are many differences in social securities laws, in social law, and in many other areas. So the problem of Europe is we are not harmonizing fast enough to make sure that we have the same competitiveness in each country of Europe. The second point is, and then I'm coming back to more the ESG, the Green Deal and all that, what strikes me is that the last 5 years we're making the accent on the competitive advantage of the Green Deal. We were all making millions and millions of euros in order to realize the Green Deal. And in fact, we are making a lot of legislation, but we are not really making the Green Deal effective. Just an example, the battery history. You know, the batteries, we were going to build in Europe a battery industry. Right? That would be the best batteries, the more efficient. Well, the reality today is China is making cheaper batteries for cheaper cars. And it's really like with the solar panel, it's really playing the game. So the question is not only regulation, like my predecessor rightly said. The reality is, what is our business model? Where do we want to go with Europe? If we don't want raw capitalism, as someone said, what kind of capitalism do we want? What kind of market economy do we want? And what is the middle term and the long term vision? Because short term, we're just making like a chicken without head, you know, we're running in all direction, but we need to have a more consistent view. And I think that is then a problem of political reality of Europe. Kissinger once said, who do I call when I want to reach Europe? Well, we still have the same problem. We need to work on the real European unity, and now is the moment. Never waste a good crisis.
Benoit, I mean, something that was talked about in the Draghi report a good deal was how we get European companies to scale up. You know, that the scale up issue seems to be a key one. Do you have any thoughts about how we get the ecosystem right for scale ups?
But let me first react to what Philippe and Séverine said just before me. Obviously, regulation is an issue in Europe, but I think that regulation is a consequence of a culture. And we need to work on the culture, on the investment culture. If you look at all the incentives that are available in Europe, in all the different countries, to promote debt instruments and to promote savings, if we put the same kind of incentives to equity investments, where we would change basically the mentality and incentivize people to invest more into equities in the local capital markets, that would already make quite a difference. And we have to be bolder in Europe and to be ready to take more risks. I think that the regulation is just a sign of a fear that we may have to take risks. But what made the US great is their appetite for risk that we don't have, and we should learn from that in Europe. Then to come back on your question on the scale-ups, well, obviously a scale-up in many cases is sometimes too small to go public, to apply for a listing, because, well, with the listing come a lot of responsibilities and consequences. And well, we at Euronext we have a lot of interaction with scale-up startups, and we try to help them to identify when they can get ready for an IPO. And the first thing that we tell them when they speak to us is, be prepared. Be always prepared for the next step. And how do you get prepared for the next step? Well, is to look at what's required for the next step. For instance, if your aim is to go public, and you will need a proper governance and a strong board. Well, what prevents you today from already having this strong board in place at your company? That will help you to take better decisions, more informed decisions, and will help the business to grow. The same applies for IFRS, for instance. Most of times, these scale-ups are still publishing their accounts in local GAAP. Well, if you can already take today the step of moving to IFRS, well, that's already something that's ticked off, and that helps you prepare the next step and to work on speed. And speed is maybe something which is very important. It was mentioned in the previous intervention of David with the CEO of Google. When we see how many executive orders have been taken by President Trump already in the first days of his new tenure, and when we compare with the speed or the slowness that we have in Europe, where it takes basically 2 years between the idea and the implemented acts, well, we should definitely learn from that to be able to go faster and to react quicker to evolving market conditions.
Maria, can I just come back to you? Corporate governance is going to be the topic of our next panel. But there has been some points made. I think Séverine made the point that we mustn't throw out our good governance regulation and practices too readily, because it really does matter. What is the importance, do you think, of corporate governance in the competitiveness ecosystem? And does corporate governance matter here, or is actually European competitiveness more about other things?
Thank you very much. Well, I think that we all on this panel and within ecoDa agree that corporate governance is really important to competitiveness. Corporate governance, like the basics and the fundamentals for conducting businesses. So this is like how this corporate governance framework look like and how it's designed is of great importance for businesses to create the trust needed in the market to get investments, not the least. So corporate governance is very important, and not least in terms of transparency, accountability, appropriate controls and responsibilities. And trust is built over many years. If we look at the European Union with 27 different markets, we have almost 27 different corporate governance systems. And I think we have to acknowledge this, and it's really important from the legislators' perspective on EU level that it's delicate systems. They have been created over years. They are each a separate ecosystem that depend on different building blocks. So we cannot just say that this is how it's supposed to be done, because there are different ways in which to do it that works really well within the EU today. So that is one main message from my perspective is that it's important, but make sure not to hamper it, not to harm things that function well. It's quite easily done to ruin things that work. And since this is so important to the trust capital market successes and to attract capital to the market. And I know that Benoit, you mentioned Sweden a couple of times, one time at least, as one of the capital markets within the EU that seem to function well. So I'd like to say that it's of course many reasons for that, and I think that many try to find out the exact reasons. But one of the important building blocks that we see is the system on corporate governance with a very active and well-functioning self-regulation, which also, to the point you made, Benoit, on quick legislation. Self-regulation is a way of making sure that you adapt to changing market conditions and on problems that you see on the market, and you can bring new rules and requirements to the market quick that are well designed for the needs of the market participants. And I believe that this is one of the building blocks for creating a successful capital market in Sweden that I think we should not we have to be mindful of.
Séverine, one important aspect of the ecosystem is the role played by shareholders. And I know that you or your organisation, ICGN, recently wrote to the European Commission saying, look, shareholders can't exercise their rights properly in a number of European jurisdictions. Perhaps you want to say something about how shareholder oversight and shareholder voting could work better within the EU.
Yes, thanks. Yes, I think the EU has tried to address this issue with the Shareholder Right Directive. So now that there is a revision of the directive, I would say maybe it should be a regulation. There are certain numbers of barriers and obstacles that could be addressed. So, the fact that there are different corporate governance models and cultures within Europe, I think that works quite well, and investors have learned to know the specifics. And it's, as you said, Maria, it's built on history and culture and different company laws. It would be very difficult to harmonize that and maybe not even a good idea as such. But I think removing obstacles to shareholders being able to vote, being able to receive the information they need ahead of the AGM sufficiently in advance to make informed decisions. These are all little things that would help integrate the single market further and remove these unnecessary obstacles. So very much in line with the Commission's agenda. Sometimes you have complicated power of attorney requirements. Sometimes you need to be physically present in the AGM to vote. Things like that I think belong to the past. So we need to modernize the voting chain and make things much more efficient.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to some of the questions coming from the audience now, if I may. And Alessandro, maybe I could put one of these to you. It's a question about board evaluation and assessment, because I'm thinking that that's something that you probably have experience of in your role. And the question is, are there any digital self-assessment tools which are currently available to evaluate board quality, not only in terms of things like gender diversity, but also what the questioner calls deep diversity. So that's the breadth of knowledge and skills across a whole range of different areas: technology, innovation, sustainability and risk management. So I suppose this is really about how the board itself can actually help further the European growth and competitiveness agenda.
Yes, thanks for the question to the audience. Working for a regulated company, our online tool to assess our board effectiveness is the supervisory guidelines that we receive. So we are required to undertake regular assessment of our board of directors against a number of elements. So we have a skills matrix where we identify and assess the relevant skills for each member of the board. We need to highlight that a board have to be diverse, and they have to act in a collegial way, which means that we do not require each and single board member to have exactly the same background, but on the opposite, it is important that collegially they can form a panel that can reach consensus to set a strategy which is effective. In terms of the evaluation, every board has terms of reference, so my recommendation would be to assess the effectiveness against the specific terms of reference of the board, but also for companies that are non-regulated. Here, a good advice I can provide is really to look at the guidelines provided by supervisory authorities. For example, in the banking sector, I work in the insurance sector. These guidelines are very useful toolkits that exist to undertake a board evaluation according to standards and criteria that are really effective. Certainly, I suppose that with the development of new artificial intelligence technology, we will soon see other tools that will be developed to undertake an effective board evaluation. But I would encourage not to wait for the technological development to come, but really to anticipate, and even in small companies or non-for-profit association, to have a good and robust governance and to regularly assess the effectiveness of your board of directors.
Thank you. Séverine, we've got a question here about the use of technology to try and overcome the principal agent problem of corporate governance. Are there ways in which we can use AI or digital tools to somehow address that? And I know that in the world of investors, there has been a good deal of work going on whereby index providers have been trying to find ways to allow the end beneficiaries to actually vote in annual general meetings and express their own preferences. Do you have any thoughts about how technology can be used to address this?
But I was thinking that technology is very useful for investors to I see myself when I speak, so I'm going to hide myself. I think the technology is used by investors who are developing, quite complex systems to be able to look at company reporting and really cut through the noise and pick the information that is necessary, and then they can manage to draw a conclusion that is fed directly to the portfolio managers making the investment decision. So I mean, technology is a huge tool to be able to really find out if the governance is acceptable, if the board is truly independent, so making really the life easier for investors. But I think your question is about pass-through voting, where asset managers can offer the possibility to their clients to make the voting decision. So that's something that some of the larger asset managers in the United States have done. It can be quite helpful to give that choice to the investors, especially when you think the end investor can be a pension fund, so already quite sophisticated and able to make their own voting decision. So it's an interesting tool that not all asset managers. There are some different perspectives within the investment community on this topic.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. There's a question here from someone who's still pretty sceptical, actually, about whether the omnibus regulation will actually sufficiently remove the regulatory burden in terms of reporting and also due diligence of supply chains. But I guess that this is a discussion that's going to run and run. Ultimately, I think it comes down to a question of balance. Have we got the balance right between achieving the things that we do all want to achieve? And I think net zero is, despite what's happening in the United States, it's still a widely accepted objective that we all have for Europe and also for the UK as well, while also allowing entrepreneurship, innovation, and the growth mentality to really develop and have full reign in the European economy, because it really is so important for all of us. I just want to thank everyone here for your participation. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. It's just, I think, be the first of many discussions on this topic. And Trevor, I think I'll now hand back to you.
Well, thank you, Roger. And thanks to all our panellists for such a rich and insightful discussion. We will shortly be taking a 15-minute break. But before we do, we'd like to share a short video prepared by ecoDa. ecoDa has been at the forefront of promoting strong corporate governance across Europe for over 2 decades. Through its engagement with the European Commission and EU policymakers, ecoDa has worked to ensure that governance standards evolve in a way that supports European businesses, enhance board professionalism, and strengthens corporate oversight. This video highlights ecoDa's work with EU institutions, its contributions to governance best practices, and its vision for the future. Let's take a look.
Good afternoon, Ritis. Good afternoon, Beatrice. It's really nice to have you today to try to tell the story of the 20 last and first years of ecoDa, the European Voice of Directors. Can you tell us a little bit who was then in charge and where did this initiative come from? Try to make a pan-European organization.
In fact, we have to come back to the action plan in 2003. So that was an action plan. The aim of this action plan was basically to modernize European corporate law, but also to incentivize and enhance corporate governance, as you said. And this is really this action plan which really truly set the stage for the creation of ecoDa.
During these years, again, how did ecoDa try to build up the relation with McCreevy and the people around?
So maybe just to mention that under the mandates of Commissioner Bockelstein, but also Commissioner McGreevy, several texts were adopted. You mentioned a light touch, but at the end, quite a few texts.
It was not that light.
No, not that light. And those legislation, the text, have still impact on board composition nowadays.
At the time, we had again a new commissioner, which was a former French minister, Michel Barnier. He had taken over McGreevy's portfolio in 2010. And of course, he pushed an agenda of change. And again, I would like to quote him. He said, we need to, the culture of governance to be changed. And he pleaded for better corporate governance. He pleaded for more transparency, better risk management within companies, but also more checks and balances. So how did you experience this change of mood?
Well, you know, Florence, all European commissioners brought different tones to their mandates. You mentioned earlier the light touch of Commissioner McGreevy, so that was clear. It was no longer the case with Commissioner Barnier, because he really gave a boost to legislation. Following the financial crisis. And his motto, I don't know if you remember, was business as usual is no longer an option. Under the mandate of Commissioner Renders, in fact, corporate governance became really a cross-cutting issue. It was also the time for us, and we felt basically the need to refresh our education program. And it was in October 2022 that we launched the European Board Diploma, which was successful and is still successful. We organize still today 3 editions a year, and we have about 35 participants coming from different member states.
Now the focus is on competitiveness, on reducing administrative burden, on simplifying implementation of EU regulation. So do you expect again a change in the coming years?
Well, you are completely right. In fact, competitiveness is now the buzzword in Brussels. And the focus on industrial policy and strategic autonomy for the EU is quite new and will have consequences.
Ritis, how do you see the missions and undertakings of ecoDa evolve in the future?
I think that we have to first understand where we are. Means not ecoDa, but overall in Europe. And latest days are showing that our situation is not the best ever, I would say softly. And actually, global competitiveness of Europe could be kind of challenged only by the businesses in Europe. And those that are looking forward more years are the members of the boards of the companies. So I think that the ecoDa will play a really very important role in the advocacy activities, right? Because we will be staying as a very strong partners of the European institutions in order to cooperate and to find out the best ways how our businesses should be regulated, how our businesses should be developed, how we can improve the competitiveness of our economies and so on. So this voice of European directors will be really prevailing in the coming years, in coming decades, I believe, as well. Another topic and activity is the education, because when you are in uncertain times, and we are, and I'm big believer that we will stay. And in certain times, I do not believe that our waters will become calm for 10 coming years and we will be happy. No, not at all. So it means that you will have to improve your knowledge much faster and kind of update your knowledge much faster.
Well, I think that's a great final word. And this leads us to the end of this talk, not to the end of ecoDa. Thank you very much, Ritis. Thank you, Beatrice, for having shared this slice of European and corporate history. And I wish you the best for the next 20 years then.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Florence.
Florence.
Thank you.
Beatrice.
Thank you to ecoDa for that insightful look at the evolution of corporate governance in Europe and its long-standing engagement with the EU institutions. We will now take a 10 to 15 minute break before returning for the next session. Please do take this time to step away, and we look forward to welcoming you back shortly. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a good break. We now move to our second panel discussion, the role of corporate governance in boosting European competitiveness. While our first panel explored the broader ecosystem for EU competitiveness, this session will take a sectoral perspective, bringing together leaders from key industries, fintech, bioeconomy, automotive, and startups. They will examine the competitive challenges their industries face and the role corporate governance plays in helping their companies succeed. We're honoured to have with us experienced board members and business leaders who will share their insights on the specific challenges their industries face in Europe and how governance can help address them, and how board decision-making and governance structures can be leveraged to enhance long-term competitiveness. Moderating this discussion is Denis Thérain, Chair of the French Institute of Directors. Denis is an experienced board leader, entrepreneur, and investor with a 20-year board experience in listed, family, and private-held companies in Europe, the US, and Africa, and has held leadership roles in Amazon, Salesforce, and Otto Group. Joining him are Mari Kiviniemi, former Prime Minister of Finland and past Deputy Secretary of the OECD. Maria has extensive leadership experience in public policy and economic development. Jan Wozniak is Chairman of the Non-Executive Board at Sanok Rubber Company. Jan has 16 years of board experience and 31 years in finance. He specializes in transformation, growth, and VC investments across IT, manufacturing, finance, and retail sectors. Carola Puszkola is board chair and non-executive director with expertise in financial services, insurance, and technology. She serves on the boards of Clearbank Europe, DFV, Deutsche Vermögensversicherung AG, and Melonian Digital. Marika Rathlee, founder of Lauder Capital, specializes in corporate governance and executive recruitment. She has led over 300 leadership assessments for listed and private companies, family businesses, investment funds, and chairs the board of Devialet. This panel will explore key issues, such as balancing regulation and innovation, particularly in industries like fintech, where regulation varies widely across EU member states. They'll also look at the lack of access to capital for European startups and scale-ups and what could be done to make Europe a better place for entrepreneurs. And the impact of compliance on SMEs, particularly in industries like automotive, where supply chains are under pressure. They'll look at how boards can improve decision-making, diversity, and innovation to drive long-term business success. The discussions will also provide recommendations to EU policymakers, highlighting what needs to change to ensure Europe remains a competitive and attractive market for investment and growth. And with that, I'll now hand over to Denis Thérain, who will lead us through what promises to be a fascinating discussion. Denis, over to you.
Thank you very much for the great introduction. So after looking at a broader scale of what Europe is facing, let's ground the discussion as board member in different industries. Not all industries are facing the same challenges. Not all companies are dealing with it in their different ways. So what I propose is I'm going to go around and ask 2 questions to each of the members, and after we'll open up for any question the audience may have. Feel free to get your question on the feed, and I will read them afterwards. So the first question is around the industry. What is the specific industry, what is the specific challenge that your industry faces? And I will start on the fintech with Carola. So Carola, up to you. What can you tell us about the challenges your industry face?
European fintech space, I see 5 distinct challenges. The first one I would like to point out are the regulatory challenges. Looking at fintech, you have financial services on the one hand, so regulation, and you have technology, which hopefully means innovation. And we need regulation that fosters innovation. We don't always do that. We don't always have that. In addition, we sometimes see regulation that is slightly different in different European markets, which makes it much harder to operate on a European scale. So we need regulatory reforms. The second challenge I would like to point out are the funding restraints, especially if I compare European fintech and US fintech, there is a wide difference. I mean, I looked at the numbers for last year in the US, the investment was around 51 billion versus 8.7 billion in Europe. So we really need more access to funding in Europe. The third challenge I would like to point out is the attraction and retention of talent. If we talk a lot in all European countries about migration, but we don't talk about how do we attract top talent, educated talent. Do we have special visa programs? Do we have special tax incentives? Even founders in Europe, they often don't stay in Europe. They go to the US, to Silicon Valley, because there is less bureaucracy. There is more access to capital and talent. So we urgently need to look at talent retention. The fourth challenge I would like to point out is market fragmentation. I mean, we all love our European cultures, our different languages. But it's much harder for us to scale. And again, looking at the fintech space, looking at the number of unicorns and comparing European unicorns to the US, we see a wide difference. There are probably double, triple, quadruple number of unicorns in the fintech space in the US compared to Europe, depending on the sources we are looking at. And the last challenge I would like to point out is capital market attractiveness. We just see that one of our major European fintech unicorns, Klarna, they are just filing for IPO, but they are not filing for IPO in Europe. They file for IPO in New York. So I think that's very illustrative for our capital markets. So we urgently need programs to make our capital markets more attractive. So I would like to stay with these 5 points for the fintech space.
Well, thank you very much. If you had one message to the European Commission, what would that be?
I would say regulatory reform is vital because we need regulation that really fosters innovation, that doesn't hinder us. We need to find ways to be able to try things. I know that the UK, they experimented very successfully with the sandbox system. That could be an attractive option. So I would say regulatory reform is vital, but also European funding. We need to make it more attractive for pension funds, for private equity investors to invest in Europe, so that we are on an equal playing field with the US.
Well, thank you very much, Carola, for your vision on the fintech. Now let's go to a new economy, bioeconomy, with Mary here. Mary, the same question. What is the specific challenge that your industry faces in Europe? And I'm going to come back after with the second question is, what would be your message to the European Commission? We can't hear you.
I would like to mention... Sorry?
Okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I would like to mention actually 4 challenges which the bioeconomy sector faces. And first is the insufficient recognition of the bioeconomy's role. While the EU is aiming for climate neutrality by 2050, policies do not fully recognize the bioeconomy as a key enabler of sustainable carbon cycles. And really sustainably sourced renewable raw materials should be prioritized in EU policies to replace fossil-based alternatives. And one concrete example is the EU's industrial strategy, which is of course going to be renewed quite soon. And there, the bioeconomy was largely overlooked, and by that it actually contradicted the EU's own bioeconomy strategy. So what to do is mainstreaming, that is the key, enabling bioeconomy to play a key role in Europe's green transition and strategic autonomy. And what it then means when prioritizing bio-based products in EU policies, we have to promote the cascading use of biomass, ensuring that food is first used for high-value products before being used for energy. Also integrating sustainable materials requirements into public procurement policies to create demand for bio-based solutions, and also fully recognize sustainably sourced renewable content and raw materials as circular input in different product regulations, for example, as specific obligations demanding the use of minimum renewable content in construction. My second point is the regulatory complexity and inconsistency, very much in line with what Carola just before me said. The bioeconomy sector is subject to multiple overlapping EU regulations, creating uncertainty and administrative burdens. So the lack of coherent and predictable regulatory framework hinders long-term investments in bioeconomy innovations. And it's excellent that the Commission is investing in streamlining and simplifying regulation now in its new work program. And in this work, I think it's important to listen to the views of businesses to ensure that the objectives are truly achieved. And for the bioeconomy, it's important to establish a consistent science-based regulatory framework that recognizes sustainably managed forests as a key carbon sink and resource, and also the diverse nature of renewable natural capital and its crucial role for the well-being of natural and built ecosystems should be recognized. Then my third point is investment in innovation and technology development. The forest industry is investing in high-value bio-based products, including bioplastics, textiles, and advanced biomaterials. However, the high costs and risks associated with piloting and scaling up new technologies require stronger EU-level funding support. So what should be done? Expand EU funding for bio-based innovation, including pilot projects, commercialization efforts, and research on circular economy solutions, and also support the development of biorefineries as hubs for sustainable material production and carbon utilization, and finance more piloting, demonstration projects, and upscaling, which are the most expensive and risky phases of innovations in our industry. And my fourth point concerns raw material availability and market access. At the EU level, we should make sure that EU policies affecting land use, biodiversity, and carbon sequestration do not reduce the availability of sustainably managed wood. And also the bioeconomy requires better access to European and global markets to compete effectively against fossil-based products. So what is needed? Of course, fair and open trade policies. The bio-based industries should be made an indispensable part of the EU's geopolitical strategy. And renewable raw materials can replace fossil materials imported from outside EU, also to boost self-sufficiency and resilience. And it's important to prevent carbon and harvest leakage by ensuring that EU climate policies don't disadvantage European industries. And also it's important for the sector to ensure sustainable raw material supply, establish EU-wide policies that require forest regeneration after harvesting to maintain a continued supply of sustainable biomass, and also encourage voluntary carbon removal initiatives to enhance the role of forests in climate change mitigation while maintaining their economic potentials. I think that these four challenges are the most important which we face in the bioeconomy sector.
All right. Thank you very much. And I heard your call to the European Commission, which is to make the bioeconomy one of the strategic economies in Europe. Thank you very much. Let's move now to a industry which is the bread and butter of many economies in Europe, which is the automotive industry, with Jan. Jan, what are the challenges you face, and what, I'll come back to you afterwards, what would be your message to the European Commission?
Thank you. The automotive industry is faced with similar challenges as other industries. So excessive regulatory burdens, unharmonized laws, innovation funding and commercialization, talent attraction and retention, and of course, dumping and unfair market subsidy threats. I would like to present 7 areas of specific challenges that face the automotive industry. And the first one of these is accelerating innovation and R&D. And a specific example here is autonomous and connected vehicles. We need to accelerate development in AI, vehicle to everything, and autonomous driving systems, plus provide regulatory frameworks for testing and gradual adoption of autonomous driving. The second area is strengthening of the supply chains and supply chain resilience. And a good example here would be improvement in circular economy and recycling regulations and practices, particularly aimed at improving recycling for lithium, rare earths, and automotive parts. The third area is sustainability and green transition. And a good example here is hydrogen economy. We need to invest in green hydrogen for heavy-duty vehicles and long-haul transport, as this seems to be, for now, as most effective. The fourth area is digital transformation. An example here would be connected and shared mobility. So we need to accelerate development of mobility as a service solutions that integrate public transport, ride sharing, and smart urban mobility. The fifth area, very important, is competitive policy and market expansion. And here, a call from the industry that would be very helpful would be an introduction of EU-wide EAG assessment being introduced into type approval for vehicles based on subsidy and basing the subsidy levels on the resultant ESG rankings to promote vehicle producers that introduce ESG factors in their production processes and entire supply chains to a higher extent. The sixth area.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Workforce upskilling and talent attraction. Here, it would be very helpful if regulators would offer training programs to transition workers from combustion engines to EV production. Last 2 areas are charging infrastructure and energy grid upgrades. We need to expand fast charging networks and, very importantly, harmonize charging standards across all EU countries. And the last area would be enhancing cybersecurity and data regulation, for example, by creating a Made in Europe cloud solutions for automotive software to prevent over-reliance on US and Chinese tech giants.
Well, thank you very much. That's a whole array of actions to be taken. What would be your one message to the European Commission?
One message which I think can be introduced very quickly and would have the highest impact would be this introduction of the ESG assessment into type approval of vehicles and correlating the subsidies with the level of compliance, or let's say position in the ranking. That way we would promote ESG compliant producers and reduce subsidies for the ones which do not adhere to ESG factors.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's look now at the growth factor, which are startup and scale-up, where we heard earlier that we may not be at the same size and shape as what's happening in the US. So, Marika, for you, what are the elements that are challenging in the startup scale-up world, and how the Commission could really help you? We don't hear you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, wonderful.
Okay, super. Thank you. Thank you very much, Denis. I think a lot of things have already been mentioned, on typically on talent retention, on fragmentation of the European market, on me, I would say that one of the important and the main topic is the access to financing. Just a few numbers. Globally in 2024, $668 billion has been raised globally for startups and scale-up. A little bit more than in 2023, plus 5%, but below the peak of 2021. If we just step back a minute and compare ourselves to the other continent, the US market is far ahead with $209 billion raised last year, while the European startup raised $45 billion last year in our region, in decrease versus, again, this incredible year, which was 2021, at $100 billion. China startups raised approximately $26 billion in venture capital, making a decline of over 82 compared to this peak. And this decrease in Europe and China is attributed to factors such as regulatory uncertainty and geopolitical tension, which have affected the private equity confidence. I think that innovation, of course, remain at the heart of our successful startup and needs regular financing to generate sustainable companies. So with no surprise, artificial intelligence and cybersecurity has been the strong winners of the last couple of years in Europe. And I would say that my message to the European Commission would be, we need to play as one continent to be competitive and gather our forces. We have the European Investment Fund, which is a great platform. But if you want to accelerate the development of our European champion, entrepreneurs need definitely to a simplified, adapted, unified regulation and an harmonized tax policies across the European countries. And I think that maybe that would also attract the funds, the international funds, and make us even more attractive on this front.
All right, thank you very much, Marika. So we've talked about the broader scale, which is the industry and how the European Commission could help us. You're all very experienced board members. So now I'd like to go to your own board. What are the recommendations for fostering better decision-making at the board level, maybe at your board or in similar boards within your industry? And I will go with a different order. So I will start with Jan. Jan, up to you.
Thank you very much. From the current board perspective, what I would highlight is, number one, embedding innovation into board governance. So prioritize R&D and emerging technologies. The non-executive board should challenge the executive board on their innovation roadmap and ensure that KPIs for innovation are part of the executive performance reviews. Secondly, establish a technology and innovation committee. And the third area would be champion a risk-tolerant innovation culture. So, for example, promote corporate venture capitalist similar initiatives, or also go for sandbox experimentation, so allow divisions or part of the companies to test innovations without bureaucratic barriers. The second area would be strengthening of digital and sustainable transformation. So boards should support smart manufacturing industry 4.0. They should drive the ESG and circular economy agenda, ensuring that sustainability goals are aligned and part of the business strategy. Then the third area would be enhancing supply chain resilience and global competitiveness. So, for example, you need to take actions as advocating for regional supply chain diversification, sourcing from Eastern Europe, North Africa, and India. Encouragement of strategic alliances and joint ventures. So push for cross-sector collaboration, for example, automotive and energy industries for EV infrastructure. That's a natural fit. The very important part is the board leadership and talent development and innovation culture. So the board needs to make sure that the executive boards is properly using upskilling and reskilling of the teams in the companies. The non-executive board should always foster a culture of entrepreneurship. And the last section would be strengthening of global market positioning. So, for example, helping from experience on executive board members to the executive boards of how to expand into emerging markets, and also foster the dialogue via various industry committees or organizations to advocate for policy and trade strategy alignment. If I could mention one more thing that I could raise to the EU representatives, EU Commission representatives, is the one specifically applying to general assemblies, because I believe it starts with the right people in the right place. So shareholders play a very special role in this. So I would propose a mandatory shareholder discussion on adequate board composition, and also introducing a requirement that the published self-assessment of the board, non-executive board, should have a mandatory section on adequate board competence and experience profile, that these profiles then could be used by the shareholders in evaluating and adjusting the composition of the non-executive boards.
Well, that's a bold vision. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think that's something that ecoDa should really think about in pushing. Marika, in your world, the startup scale-up, how can decision-making be better in startup scale-up?
Well, as we know, many startups are unaware about the importance of a good corporate governance practices. And this could be an hinder, on the long-term sustainability of the company itself. What is important is maybe to highlight the fact that there's a board at each stage of the development of the startup, from startup to scale up to growth company and then to mature company. What we observe is the board in Series A and Series B are most of the time composed exclusively with the founders and the first investors. There's no, in the shareholders agreement, it's important to anticipate seats for independent directors. That's maybe the second message. The second message is what is the place done for independent directors around the table. This is an important question. We are working at the moment at the IFA, and the role of this independent director since the early stage of the company is crucial to ensuring a balanced and unbiased, perspective within the board. It's sometimes difficult to find, the right way to work together between the board and the executive committee. How do you create the right dynamic between the different teams, let's say, in this organization, and how you create this collective intelligence to make good decision. As an example, I would mention Alma, which is one of the leaders in the fragmented payment in France and in Europe. His founder, Louis Chatriot, has raised more than 115 million euros in the last years, and he has added 2 independent board directors. And he said it's been a game changer for us, and in really something important in the company development. So I would say that creating a platform in Europe at the European level to promote and share best practices in governance could help nurture startup and enable them to become champion at the European market.
Well, thank you very much. I know that the European Commission is working on, startup scale-up, and ecoDa will be very active in promoting some of the elements that you recommended. Thank you. Mary, on your side, so you're no longer a startup scale-up. We're talking about a larger bioeconomy company. What is your recommendation?
I think that the board also should concentrate on the trying to create a solid long-term strategic vision. So when balancing financial performance with long-term sustainability goals, and we all know that then the decision-making should align with EU climate targets, ensuring that bio-based solutions remain competitive in the evolving regulatory landscape. And also, I think that the board should use a lot of time in thinking also on how the market will develop, or what will be the consumer behavior in the future. Also, a lot of energy on thinking how the geopolitical landscape will develop, as well as geoeconomy is affecting all the companies. So kind of balancing this long-term sustainability goals and also the short-term financial performance in the best possible way, and supporting then the company in creating that vision and making sure that it's all the time update. And another point I would like to make is the research and development, and making sure that the company is always in the forefront of it, invests in it enough, using also all the resources they are at the European level and from the state, but also of course using its own resources in it, and encourage the whole company really to be in forefront of it, and using the most updated technology also in developing the company. So what is needed for the board is really a strong mix of industry expertise, sustainability focus, regulatory insight, and also innovation-driven leadership. I think that is essential in ensuring that bioeconomy remains competitive, resilient, and also aligned with global sustainability goals.
You mentioned two elements, which is the board composition with having the right skill, and also the right decision between the medium to long term and the short term, because the company still need to be performant. So thank you very much. Carola, in your industry or in your board, what would you recommend to foster better decision making?
I would say in general, in the industry, it would be good to strengthen the digital expertise in board composition. We talk a lot about diversity in boards, but we don't really talk about required functional expertise. For example, it would be good to mandate IT digital literacy of board members. For example, 25% of board members should have a literacy in digital technologies, which in fintech would be artificial intelligence, blockchain, and cybersecurity. In addition, I would implement an annual upskilling program for all board members, because it's important that everybody has a basic understanding. In terms of governance structures, I would suggest to create technology committees to oversee digital strategies, and in addition to require to look at digital KPIs, technology KPIs, to assess the progress and to set clear goals on innovation. And I think the third point is I can only echo what Jan was saying, that it is extremely important to foster an innovation culture. That's key, and the board can help to foster this culture, making sure that we are not only talking about regulation, but also about innovation.
Right. Thank you very much. You talk about innovation and technology, which are key pillars, whether they are, I'd like to say, in a new industry or in an industry that has been here for 100 years, like the automotive. So when and you also talk about the need for board members to continue to upgrade their skill and to train themselves. which is something which may be forgotten once you're on the board. But it is true that it is absolutely necessary to continue to upgrade your skill, to train yourself. And all the institutes throughout Europe have those kind of programs. So feel free to go and call them and say, can you help us train myself on those specific skills or technologies? All right, so let's open up to questions now. You can enter the questions in the feed, and they'll come to me, and I will read them. So I have one question, which is the following. From Constance's presentation, we understand that board members in Europe are a little bit younger than those in the US. However, what would your recommendation be to embark a new generation? So I don't know who wants to take that question, or a couple of people can do it. Anybody wants to answer it first? Okay, Jan, go ahead. You're mute. Okay, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Good.
I wouldn't really that much focus on the age. I would focus on the skills and experience. Because you might have someone who is relatively young, but has, for example, funded a couple of startups and worked with them with various results, but that's definitely worth a lot of experience. So I wouldn't approach it from an age perspective at all.
All right. One vision.
And I
is
would
the
say,
country, Marika.
Yeah, and I would say in the same way, someone seasoned, extremely seasoned, is still very young in terms of mindset, in terms of, experience sharing, in terms of coaching others. This is also great value, I would say, around the table too. I totally agree with you, Jan. Age is not the driver. It's really about competence and attitude. I mean, how would you like to contribute to the board and to the company performance?
All right. So we're talking about skills and the way we behave. How is this measured in your different boards? Because I know that some boards have some very strict way to measure it on a regular basis. Others do it maybe a little bit less. Is there a pretty good practice that you would like to share with us? I will go back to you, Marika. You were challenging the fact that Startup Scale-Up needs some more, external members or independent board members to be able to help them go to the next level. How is this assessed, and how are boards measured in Startup Scale-Up?
So I would say, depends of the maturity of the startup. If it's already in Series A, B, C, D, depends. Obviously, you have different layers of investors coming in. The more difficult, I have to say, and this is based on my experience and my observation, is how you convinced, observers and funders to recruit independent directors. And then when you have already been to this first step, how do you qualify the needs, actually? Needs could be different around the table. And you need, at the end of the day, to always keep in mind the social interest of the company. How you focus on, supporting the management team, the founders, of course, when they are still there, and how you make a complementary, additional, let's say, competencies around the table against, let's say, investors, which are great, but most of the time they have been only investors for all along their career. So I think a good match between entrepreneurs, seasoned entrepreneurs, CEOs, and investors to start with. It's super reliable. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And then, as Jan said, I mean, it's not a question of age; it's a question of expertise and needs time to time. And the board needs to evolve also with the evolution of the company itself and its needs.
Right. Thank you, Carola. The banking world is maybe one of with the highest regulation in the world, and especially in Europe. How do you assess board participation and board appropriate decision-making or board members' behavior in the financial world and in fintech?
Well, I mean, I think it's not very different from other industries. I mean, you need the right skills, you need a diverse board, you need some members who understand regulation really well, but you also need other members who challenge regulation and who are more towards the innovation front. I mean, decision making should be balanced, and you should always look at decisions from different perspectives. And if you see in decision making or in the board, there are certain skills that are not present, and it's harder to make a decision. You need to identify these skill gaps, and you need to train board members. Maybe not all of them, maybe some. But decision making should be balanced.
Mary, do you want to add something, or we will close up? I just want to give you the.
No, actually, I just want to ask your kind of the first question when it comes to the age. So I don't either think that is kind of the most decisive thing. And I have to say that Europe is not using all the resources it has compared to US when it comes to those experienced leaders who have already retired. I noticed that in US, from the age group over 60 and 70, you have a much more bigger share as members of board of directors. So diversity is really the key. Not the age is not decisive, but also we could use all the potential we have in the European countries in terms of experience. Thank you.
So we will go to the closing remark, and I will ask each of you, one sentence to close. Either it's a call to the European Commission or a call to ourselves, board members, to change the way we make decisions. So I will ask Jan, what is your closing remark or thought to all of us board members?
I would go back to the one specific I mentioned, which is introducing this ESG assessment into type approval of vehicles. That's a low-hanging fruit to me. From a board perspective, I would say focus on diversity and adequacy of the board skill and experience given a specific company situation. I believe that is paramount because the markets and the environment is changing so fast, so the board also needs to evolve.
Thank you very much. Marika, what's your closing remark?
Yeah, I would say for entrepreneurs and the startup and scale-ups, ecosystem, they have shown in the last 15 years, especially in France on the French tech, that they've been audacious and willing to explore a new area. I would say let's go on and be even more ambitious in Europe, let's say, and create a European champion. I think we have to push boundaries.
Thank you. Carola.
My pledge would be give us regulations that foster innovation, that don't hinder us. I mean, we like regulation, we need it, we recognize that, but sometimes it's very difficult. And I would like to give one example where regulation is in favor of Europe. It's the MiCA, the markets in crypto assets. Everybody recognizes that this gives us an advantage at the moment to the US. So give us regulation like that and don't hinder us.
Thank you very much. Mary, the closing remark.
So I really think that the competitiveness of Europe is the key word now, and not only the Commission but also the member countries really have to work for better regulation, and also we all should be hungrier when it comes to kind of doing our business. There's a lot to catch up when it comes to US, so we really have to put all our efforts in doing what is needed at the European level and also at the national level and also at the company level in order to be more competitive and by that creating more growth.
All right. Thank you very much for giving us your insight in your different industries. I hope it helped you all, reflect on your own industry and your own behavior as a board member. Let's go back now to the session.
Thank you, Danny. And thank you to our panelists for such an insightful and thought-provoking discussion. It's clear that corporate governance is not just about compliance, it's a key driver of business resilience, strategic decision-making, and ultimately European competitiveness. As we move into the final session of today's conference, I will be facilitating a conversation that looks ahead to the future of board and European competitiveness. We've heard today about the challenges and opportunities facing European business, from digital transformation and regulatory complexity to access to capital and governance best practices. But how should boards evolve to meet these challenges? What does the future of governance leadership look like? To explore this, I'm joined by Ritis Abrevicius, Chair of ecoDa, who you met earlier, along with two other distinguished experts. They are Valentine Dupré, board member at Greenyard, is an expert in sustainability, diversity, and family business governance. She coaches organizations on collective leadership and is a certified family business advisor. Professor Konstantinos Tsakakis is Knowledge and Research Director at Guberna and is a leading authority in corporate governance and capital markets law. He's also a professor at University of Glasgow and advises EU regulatory bodies on governance policy. Together, we will reflect on today's discussions and consider how boards must adapt to ensure long-term success and competitiveness. And I'll be putting a few questions to each of our speakers to guide this conversation. So, to start, I'd like to take a step back and reflect on what we've heard today. Throughout this conference, we've discussed a wide range of issues, from regulatory complexity, digital disruption, to shifting investor expectations and the evolving role of corporate governance in competitiveness. With that in mind, let me ask our first question to Ritis. Ritis, from your perspective, what do you see as the single most pressing challenge facing boards today, and why?
Thank you, Trevor. Actually, while serving on the board of independent board director for more than 15 years and assessing and analyzing the work of the boards for a decade, I can say that in today's increasingly unpredictable and disruptive world that we have recently facing more and more, boards must be more agile, proactive, and engaged than ever before. Through my daily conversations to the board members, I see that it has become clear that many boards are not as actively involved as they should be. Too often I hear the statements like, we have 6 board meetings a year. Usually our board meeting lasts 3-4 hours. Then I'm raising the question, 6 times 3, it's 18 hours. What value you can create as a board for the company in 16 hours a year? So the first step for any board should be to challenge not the management, but itself, right? Continuously assessing its effectiveness, the performance, questioning level of engagement, and ensuring that it's truly adding strategic value to the organization it is serving for.
Thank you, Ritis. And Valentine, what's your perspective?
I would say it's the same that it's always been, namely juggling short and long-term perspectives. In other words, making sure that you're economically viable today and that you're contributing to tomorrow's society. I think the biggest difference or looking forward is that we've constructed a very convenient linear world in which to operate. And unfortunately, our environment is forcing upon us in an increasing way a non-linear world, which I think will come with drastic changes in business models and in company culture. So I guess that's where the biggest building sites are, from my perspective.
Valentin, thank you. And Konstantinos, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. To follow up from what Valentin just said, is I think for me the most critical part is how you remain relevant in an ever-changing landscape, because we can talk about digitization, we can talk about younger generations of investors or stakeholders expecting constantly different things from you as a board and as a management. We can talk about geopolitics. So changes will happen and we will keep on experiencing new and new challenges. So it's not about focusing on one of these challenges, because they are bound to change again and again and again. It's how you remain relevant. But in order to be relevant with the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, you need to be constantly proactively seeking to better your modus operandi, to keep on reflecting upon what's coming your way and make sure that you are ready to tackle it.
Thank you, Konstantinos, and thank you for all those insights. It's clear that boards face multiple, often interconnected challenges. And that brings me to my next question. Given these challenges, it's not just about recognizing them, it's about how boards respond. So let me start this time with Valentin. Valentin, from a governance perspective, what changes do you believe need to happen at the board level, whether in composition, decision-making, or governance structures, to ensure companies remain competitive?
I think it's a hard question because it's probably different for every company. But in general, I believe that as a society, we're not always super equipped to deal with emotions or to work through emotions. And a board is a group of people, so a room full of emotions. So I would say if we can adapt decision-making processes and other processes in a way that allows room to struggle through emotions, I think that could be a really big added value. And I guess on composition, well, a lot of companies are still looking for the proven marks, the proven stamps, quality stamps, such as a long corporate career. And I think that's important. I think it's important to have these people on boards. At the same time, I believe there is a lot of wisdom, knowledge, and expertise beyond those traditional stamps. So I would say diversity in a deeper level, so beyond the female male paradigm or the age paradigm.
Thank you, Valentin. And Konstantinos, what's your view?
Well, I would say, going back to Ritz's point, beyond checking what management is doing, and before even you start challenging management, keep on challenging yourself. I've been discussing with many board members for years, and I'm still struck by this, I would say, monolithic vision of risk, compliance-driven risk. So I keep on telling people, and I think that some people here in this room will be in accordance with what I'm going to say, start changing your mindset when you're talking about risks. Risks are not just risks, are not just compliance driven. Risks are first and foremost opportunities. Opportunities for your board to take things to the next level, to scale up, to become competitive, to also launch a beautiful journey in innovative governance, not just to be a good player amongst competitors, but to be the shifting force of things, taking things to a different level, not just for your company, but for the whole industry. But in order to have this kind of mentality, when you perceive risk as an opportunity first and foremost, and then as a proper risk in terms of compliance, you need to start challenging yourself really. So it's also a balance. Valentin, of course, talked about diversity. Of course, it doesn't mean that we would only go for diverse profiles, but let's try and make it happen, have a balance of experience in the board, but also of different thinking, of innovative thinking. So we need to strike that kind of balance. And it's not just, of course, about diversity, it's also about inclusion. Make sure that each and every person's best qualities are brought to the table, and we basically make best possible use of these kind of traits, personality traits, social traits, knowledge traits.
Thank you, Konstantinos. And Ritis, what would you add?
Yeah, I would add some two more elements. One is the overall composition of the board. When I'm asking the boards, do you have the competences on your board, let's say the artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, sustainability, Digital transformation. I believe you understand what are the usual answers are. Not yet. But this is on the agenda for not today, but for years already. So what I want to say, that the boards themselves that have to assess, are we fit for purpose? Are we fit for the delivering the greatest value to this company, driving this company to the real competitive kind of shape, and so on and so on. One more important factor is the role of the chair of the board. I'm asking people involved in governance, what do you think, what is the, from your perspective, what do you think, what is the importance of the chair in relation to the overall performance and effectiveness of the board work? Let's start from 0 and end with 100. And my observation shows that it's about, from the people that I talk, it's about 80%, 80. So the importance of the chair in organizing work, the leading the board, and so on is crucial. So this is also very important. It's one person anyway in the boardroom, but it's very important person. So we have to also admit this. And the board should understand that they are on the top of the company, because upwards is only the shareholders. Mm-hmm. So they have to take the lead. They have to take the responsibility of bringing that value to the shareholders and the society at large.
Thank you, Rytis. We've talked about the key challenges and the governance changes needed to address them. As we begin to wrap up, I'd like to ask each of you to look ahead and offer a final piece of advice. So let's start with Konstantinos this time. Konstantinos, if you had to share just one key takeaway for board members as they prepare for the future, what would it be?
Thank you. Keep asking yourself the uncomfortable questions and keep on sharing the uncomfortable questions in the boardroom with others. Because if you do not go down that way, you basically risk remaining in a comfort zone, and comfort zones are not good for anyone, especially for companies. And if I could then follow up from this kind of recommendation, while you ask yourself and your colleagues the uncomfortable questions, and I'm not really referring to asking them to the management, but between yourselves in the boardroom, keep on ruthlessly updating your skills and competencies for the new challenges that we will all face. It's not enough just to call the external experts. It's a good move to call external experts when you need that kind of insight, but keep on updating your skills to be prepared for the innovative and always the next phase of governance, wherever it takes us.
Thank you, Konstantinos. And Rytis, what's your key takeaway for our audience today?
Actually, I would like everyone to think about the sports. We are a team of Europe, and we have one team in the eastern side of the globe and western side of the globe, right? And we are not winning so often, I would say, softly. So what in sports, when you are in sports, what are you doing? You are training. So I want to add actually what was said by Konstantinos, that the boards have to educate themselves, have to train themselves, they have to improve. Every single board member has to understand this duty. Because what my grandmother was saying always to me, that if something is not moving forward, it moves backwards. It's not stops, and is stable. It's moving backwards. So I would vote for those that would want to go forward, not backwards. So this is the improvement is you as a professional board member. Only then you can be a valuable board member for the company, for the economy, and so on.
Excellent, thank you, Rytis. And Valentin, what would be your one piece of advice?
I'm very much aligned with what has already been said. I would say being on a board is not the end point, it's just the beginning. So keep on making time and clearing resources to educate yourself, but also for personal development as a board member.
Thank you, Valentin. Thank you to our panelists for a very insightful discussion. Your perspectives are certainly food for thought as we consider the future of governance and competitiveness in Europe. Before we close, I'd like to take a moment to say that as founder, of Board Agenda. It has been a privilege to host ecoDa's 20th anniversary conference. At Board Agenda, we continue to provide governance leaders with in-depth reporting, expert analysis and key insights into the very issues we've discussed today. So if you're looking for a valuable resource to stay ahead of governance trends, I encourage you to explore Board Agenda. With that, I will now hand over to Rhesis Brezovjus, Chair of ecoDa, to offer his concluding remarks. Rhesis, over to you.
Thank you, Trevor. So it was a great event, a lot of very good insights. Thank you all. But firstly, I would like to thank our host, Euronext, where we are located currently, and our supporter, IBEPS. So thanks both. And at the same time, I would like to thank Trevor Pryor for the excellent navigation of our conference, and our moderators, Roger Barker and Denis Terrien, for ensuring excellent discussions and helping to bring many valuable observations today. And many thanks to all experts for sharing their valuable insights. It was really very, very useful. When in Europe, we have a lot of opportunities to be a leader. There is 500 million of us living in Europe. Education levels are among the highest in the world. We have a huge and capable internal market. Our values are strong. Investors are eager to put their money into promising initiatives. We have to use these means and opportunities we possess and achieve the desired success. Together, we can and we must drive our global competitiveness and ensure a prosperous future for Europe. Crucial role in this challenging endeavor is and will be played by ecoDa, the European Voice of Directors and the largest community of board professionals. Thank you.
Maybe just to conclude, thank you everyone for being with us today. So this conference is definitely not the end of a story. On the contrary, this conference has set the stage for deeper discussion. So while today may feel like a conclusion of our 20 past years, it is in fact the start for a new exciting journey at ecoDa. And really, I invite all of you to stay in touch with us. Thank you.